Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 377. So today I thought we'd talk about assisting. And I don't know, I'm kind of curious if you're doing assisting in your classes. So send me a DM on Instagram and just let me know. I feel like assisting has gone a little bit by the wayside since probably several years ago when there was just a lot of emphasis on people, primarily women, but all people having greater agency over their bodies. And I think this was in large part, there was kind of a social movement happening in the world around greater awareness of this concept. And just my perception is that things sort of shifted in the yoga industry, and it sort of also coincided, I think, with some very public stories from yoga teachers about things that they had experienced from their mentors, from their teachers. Very unfortunate, and I'm searching for a stronger word in this moment, illegal, quite frankly, scenarios, experiences they had had with someone that they worked for. And as a result, my sense is that assisting might not be as predominant as it was, let's say, when I started teaching over 20 years ago. And I'm curious what your experience is with it. Do you want to assist students more in your classes? Are you concerned about doing it? Are you concerned about it from the point of view of how to do it? Or maybe it has more to do with what feelings come up for you when you think about assisting a student. Or maybe it's that you were never trained as to how to assist, but you'd really like to try it. So I'm curious where you sort of sit on that spectrum. So send me a DM on Instagram and let me know, because obviously me sitting here in my room recording this podcast is a very flat experience for me. So I'd love to have some interaction with you after you listen to this episode. The idea of assisting students, of course, comes from adding another layer to their experience in your class. And, my belief is that we need as teachers to be really, really good at our verbal cues before we even go near anybody to assist them. And this is because the primary way that we're going to be teaching is through our verbal cues. And before we sort of graduate to the next step of additionally assisting a student, I believe we absolutely need to have our verbal cueing down. And the way that you will know that your verbal cueing is working is by, and I'll give you the phrase that I use in my programs when I'm training teachers that enroll. I say the cue and see what they do. Say the cue and see what they do. In that seeing your student, you will know if your cue is working. And this is why I'm always talking about the importance of getting off your mat and watching your students. Because if you're practicing with them, you're missing this vital feedback loop to you about your cues. Because, of course, they're not talking. When they're taking your class, they're not saying anything. So the only way you know if your cues are working is by watching them. And even then, there's still maybe some question, because if someone isn't doing what you're asking, it might not have anything to do with their capability. It might be that they don't understand what you're asking, or maybe they're not listening, or maybe they just don't feel like doing it, right? But your best shot at knowing if your cues are working, your verbal cues, is to watch your students. And also, the other thing is, how comfortable do you feel sharing them? If you're very nervous, if you don't know the why behind the cue, then those are problems you need to solve way before you start going into someone's personal space and putting your hands on them. So that would be the first thing I would suggest, is get yourself in a good place. And I can definitely help you if you enroll in one of my programs. I would most likely recommend the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator first. I'll help you get the cueing in tip-top shape. But I would start there. And then look to assisting as something that you graduate to. Now, maybe you're listening and you've already got your cues down. And so you are maybe currently assisting people, or you'd like to start doing that. So think about assisting as another way to teach, right? There's what we say, there's the sequence we offer, there's quick demos we might do, there's obviously assisting is what we're talking about here. So all these ways are different tools. You can think of them as your yoga teacher tool belt, and you can decide what works best for the moment. So in terms of assisting, I wanted to kind of give you kind of the two aspects of it. So if we think of assisting as the umbrella, the first thing under the umbrella is the technique. What are we doing? Where are we putting our body? How are we touching the student? Things, what's the point of our assist? Things like that. And I'm going to spend the bulk of this episode talking about that. But I want to also bring up another aspect of assisting that is really relevant only to assisting, which is, how do you feel about touching another person's body in the context of an assist? Because if we don't talk about that first, it's hard to go into the technique without being able to cleanly talk about technique. Because if you've got some belief in your mind about what it means to touch another person's body, how am I going to do that? If you've got some apprehensions about doing that, we need to bring those beliefs to the surface before we get into the technique. Otherwise, I can teach you all the technique in the world, but you're going to be going into these experiences of assisting your students with these beliefs in your mind. So think about it as the techniques live in the brain, the beliefs live in the mind. And we all have this sort of dual repository at work all the time. So let's first talk about the belief part. Now, of course, I'm the only one talking in this episode, so I don't know what you're thinking. So let's just sort of broad brush it in general. Maybe you're the kind of teacher who would really like to assist, and you look forward to learning how to do that. And you actually are looking forward to putting your hands on a student and using your hands as a way to guide your students through the practice. So that's one scenario, and there's really no problem with that, right? That would be the kind of teacher who's eager to learn how. Another scenario might be, maybe you have been assisted in the past and something's happened to you where maybe you felt like the assist didn't go over very well, or maybe you felt like you took a class and developed a relationship with the teacher, and assisting was part of that teacher's way of teaching, but you're not exactly sure you liked the way the assists were provided. So maybe you have a belief in your mind that assisting is really hard to do and needs to be really personalized and shouldn't be done in a group setting and that sort of thing. So that would be something that would hold you back, but maybe a part of you is still actually curious to learn how to do it in a way that's different from how you experienced it. Maybe another scenario might be that, and I'm going to kind of speak a little broadly. Another scenario might be that a yoga teacher might have had an experience in their life where they felt like their personal space was invaded. Now, of course, there's a wide range of things that could fall into this category. The most concerning of which being if someone was a victim of sexual assault or some other kind of physical assault. But everything prior to that, microaggressions, anything else, even feeling unsafe as a person. So if a yoga teacher has personally experienced something that falls into the category of trauma, personal assault, sexual assault, or has just a high alert sense about them, that yoga teacher might be hesitant to assist students because of their own experience. And I want you to just really take that in for a second, because I feel like when we go in to teach our yoga classes, we're not always thinking about this aspect of what our students could have in their life story, in their personal experiences. And we need to think about that. I mean, now more than ever, where these topics have been brought to the surface, and thank goodness, we need to be aware that anything is possible and always err on the side of asking for permission and asking if it's okay if I come in a little bit closer to give you an assist. And we'll talk a little bit about getting permission in a moment. But that might be something that you experienced. And that might be something that blocks you from wanting to learn how to assist. I'll just give you a quick story. I can remember when I was going through a really traumatic breakup. I mean, not traumatic in the sense of I was not physically at risk, but I was very upset. This was a breakup that I didn't want to happen, and it was happening. And I remember I went to a yoga class as part of my trying to deal with it, and the teacher was male. And when he came over to me and gave me an assistant child's pose, just him touching my body made me burst out into tears. And I absolutely remember this so vividly as if it was yesterday. And I don't think he noticed because I was facing the ground, but I noticed and was a little bit shocked at my response to his touch. And his touch was totally appropriate. It was very agnostic, which is part of what we'll talk about, and I think is the appropriate way to assist a student. But it felt to me like the touch of the person I was missing. And that's just an example of you never know what your students are going through. And physical touch is very much a prompt to emotional release sometimes for students. So this topic obviously needs to be discussed if it's something that you feel is blocking you from assisting your students. So that's kind of part one. Now, part two is talking more about the techniques of assisting. How do you do it? The whole topic about getting your students permission. So let's just talk generally about assisting from a technical standpoint. So when we look at assisting in general, when we assist our students, it's helpful to approach the student with a sense of what's the goal of this, right? Like, why am I actually approaching this student? And of course, from a high level, the goal is I want to help you. I want to be of service. Your main role should never be to force or push the student into any particular way of taking on the pose. But what I'm really driving at here is approaching the student and really having a sense before you go near them of what is the goal of this assist going to be. So in general, there are four approaches that we might take when assisting a student. We could take the approach of reinforcing the primary action of the pose. We could take the approach of reinforcing the setup of the foundation. We could take the approach of providing an instructional assist. We could take the approach of providing a deepening assist, but I'm really backing away from even suggesting that these days. I feel like the day of a deepening assist is sort of long gone, except for maybe some exception if you're teaching a specific type of restorative or yin class, something like that. So, as you approach the student, you can decide which of these actions would be most helpful. But the thing that I want you to keep in mind is this is happening in like a matter of seconds before you're even in the student's personal space. So, that's a really important point I want you to keep in mind. Now, there are key aspects of assisting that have to do with the physical component of actually putting your hands on the person. So just in general, I'm just going to give you like some general um, categories or general themes of assisting. So number one, your goal is direction, not perfection. You're just trying to guide them into a general shape of the posture versus having their body fit some template you have in your brain as to what the pose should look like. The next concept is to make it meaningful or don't do it. So if you have any confusion over what you're going to do or what the point of it is, skip it. Because the last thing you want to do is move into someone's personal space and give them a lukewarm assist. You must be crystal clear, like I just said a second ago, as to what's the point that you're trying to get across. Go in, do it, and then move on. The next thing, and this just reiterates what we've been talking about, know your intent before you approach. As soon as you're walking up to the student, know what you're going to do. This will just only be a few seconds, but will give you a chance to look, decide, and then take action. Another approach that can help is to start at the foundation. So let's say, for instance, you see somebody in Warrior One and they're leaning to the side or they're leaning too far forward. Chances are that's a reflection of where their feet are, how their feet are arranged. So as you're walking around the room thinking of assisting students, especially in standing poses, look at their feet first, because it may be that addressing their foot positioning is best to start with before you go to something else. The next thing has to do with you and where your body is in relationship to the student. You must be in your foundation before you assist the student. So if you come up to somebody and you're a little nervous about assisting them, so that sort of harkens back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, how you feel. And therefore, you're nervous to get closer to them. From a sort of a biomechanical standpoint, you're now further away from them than you need to be or than you should be to provide the assist. So you're sort of reaching out into space to touch them, and you're not close enough to them because, again, you've got this fear about being close in their personal space. So now you're not stable. You're sort of like reaching out. Imagine if you were standing in front of your sink brushing your teeth, but instead of having your torso and your hips up close to the sink, which is probably how you stand, it's how we all stand when we brush our teeth. Imagine you were stepped away from the sink about a half a foot and you were leaning forward. It'd be very uncomfortable and you wouldn't be able to hold that stance for a while when you brush your teeth. And it would probably cause lower back pain. So it's the same thing here. You must be in your foundation, and that includes being in their personal space. But again, there's a way that you do that where, from an energetic standpoint, you're not in their personal space kind of wallowing around. You know exactly what you're going to do, you do it, and then you leave. The next thing is to know the intent behind your assist, whether it's instructional, deepening, or directive. So we already talked about deepening. We're going to kind of put that off to the side. An instructional assist might be to teach them something about the shape of the pose that they don't otherwise know. So it might be in triangle, they have their hand in front of their leg instead of behind, and they're not using a block. So you might grab a block, put it behind the leg, and just lightly tap their hand, and then motion for them to put their hand from the inside of the front leg to the block. It could be directive, which is more directing a particular limb or joint in a particular way. So let's say in Warrior Two, you notice their front knee, which is bent, is shifting medially, and you might just gently tap their front knee and guide it a little more center so that it's facing straight ahead. So knowing your intent before you approach is really important. And then once you get there, to decide, am I doing an instructional assist or a directive assist? Now, this goes without saying, your goal is to help, not to hurt. And this is obvious, but it bears repeating. Students sometimes can become dependent on assists if we do them in a way that makes them feel like they can only get into the pose when someone assists them. This, I don't know that this comes up as much, but maybe it is coming up for you every once in a while. So again, I'd love to hear about it. So send me a DM on Instagram. This would be the student who says, let's say in a seated forward fold, oh, can you press on my back to press my chest closer to my thighs? That might also come up in a standing forward fold or in wheel pose. Can you stand behind my head and allow me to hold onto your ankles when I come up into the posture so I can really get into my shoulders? So these are the sorts of things that highlight a red flag that the student is now dependent on you as the teacher and dependent on assisting as part of their experience. And in my view, you don't want to be part of that codependency. It's really important that the student is able to practice on their own, and the assist is given on your part freely, not on demand. The other aspect to think about is to be creative. When you assist a student, be creative in your approach. This might mean using blocks or other props. Maybe it means you're giving them like a really short, in hushed tones, verbal instruction, or maybe you're kind of standing next to them and showing them how to do it just quickly. So being creative as a way to come at it from different angles and then look and see, are they getting it? Now, it goes without saying that you need to have props ready for people to use. So if you're teaching the class and assisting, which is most likely what's happening, have other props around the edges of the room so that if you need to kind of quickly grab a block, you've got one nearby. And of course, use the right block. If you work in a studio where they have low blocks as well as bigger blocks, I would say in general, just have those big blocks around. But maybe if you're towards the end of the class or you're doing like half pigeon, for instance, maybe have a couple of low blocks around as well. Now, you can breathe with them, although this sort of gets into that zone of we used to do this back in the day. I don't really feel like this is appropriate in today times. And by that, I mean, we used to sort of stay with the person for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. There'd be kind of breathing with the student. Again, if this is part of how you want to interact with your students and you've slowly developed a sense of trust with them and a style that includes this sort of bordering on deepening assists with coordinated breathing, go for it. I am definitely not here to say don't do that. I just think that in today times, it really does take a special situation where you're going to be doing that with your students. It's a very intimate experience and it could be misinterpreted. And really at the end of the day, again, with the exception of things like yoga therapy or different contexts that are pretty niche, yoga in medical situations, or maybe prenatal, or maybe yin or restorative, I think your kind of general yoga class, this would not be recommended. Um, I think the aspect of assisting that we need to have a lot of discretion around is whether or not we're talking to the student. Because as soon as we talk to the student, it's kind of like when an actor breaks the, what do they call it, the fourth wall. You really have to use discretion if you're ever going to talk to a student. So if you ever do feel like you need to verbalize with the student, like, hey, put your hand here on this block. Just be really low voice, really succinct, really neutral. You want to make sure your voice has no reactivity in it, nothing that's going to take them out of their practice and into their head. So in most situations, don't speak. But if you find you need to, just use those guidelines if they're helpful to guide your approach. Now, in terms of you, you want to be sure, obviously, you're super present. You're not thinking about I'm going to get lost in the sequence or where am I in the sequence. You don't want to be thinking about just that one person, you also need to keep the ball rolling for the entire class. So this is why it's important that you know your sequence well, you know your cues well, you feel really confident and calm and present when you're teaching long before you ever start to assist anybody. Now, the other aspect of assisting is you need to stay neutral regardless of how the student reacts. So the student that pushes the block away when you offer a block, no big deal. That's their choice. You can't have any reaction. The student who you suggest a modification and they don't take it, whatever it is, you're not there to convince them to do whatever it is your assist is suggesting. You're simply there to offer it as a suggestion, and it's up to them if they wish to try it. So it's important, this sort of gets into the mind aspect of the teacher, because if you're the kind of person who's rigid in your thinking about what yoga poses should look like, it will be hard for you to assist people because you'll be approaching them with that rigid mindset that you have and then superimposing that on the student. So that's why I said at the beginning of this conversation, it's really important for you as a teacher, for me as a teacher, for all of us as teachers, to really examine how we feel about assisting, what comes up for us when we think about assisting, and manage those feelings out in the open in conversation with a mentor, a coach, long before we ever start to actually assist people. The other thing, this is just minor but major, is make sure you're washing your hands both before and after class. And obviously, make sure you're not sick, make sure you don't have the flu, make sure you're not sneezing and touching your nose, make sure that you're hydrated, all of the common sense things that have to do with personal hygiene. Now, there are just a couple of semantic things, making sure you arrive to your class early so you can set up, making sure you hang out after class so you can answer questions. If you do have a class that's on the larger side, depending on the shape of your room, it could be, 5 people could be a large class for you, or maybe 50 people, whatever it is, just make sure that you have a pattern that you're using to assist rather than just a random here and there, just so that people feel like they're getting acknowledged. Now, this would be a perfect time to bring up the topic of permission. When you start your class, this is definitely the best time to bring it up. You can bring it up in a face-to-face way by saying to your students before you begin, hey, I'm going to be offering assists today. If you'd like an assist, just let me know. And you can let me know as I come around. And that way, when the person lets you know once, they're cleared for all assists. Some studios, of course, have little tokens that people put around their mats. If that's a situation that you have available to you, that makes it really easy. Other people like to ask in that first child's pose, raise your hand if you wish to be assisted. I don't know how teachers remember who raised their hand, so I don't love that as an approach, but do what works for you, but just know that you have to get their permission. Now, it can be the sort of thing where you don't bring it up at the beginning of class, and then in the moment of deciding you want to start assisting people, as you approach them, just really quietly, is it okay if I assist you? That's all. Is it okay if I assist you? And then if they say no, just move on. In terms of clothing, I know this might sound random and strange, but just make sure when you're assisting people, you're wearing yoga clothes that cover you up, you're not falling out of them, you're not wearing something that has like big dolman sleeves or really wide pant legs that could make it difficult for you to move from person to person. So wide-legged yoga pants are easy to trip on. Big dolman sleeves kind of drape over the person. I mean, think about when you go to get your hair cut. If the person is wearing a shirt and then they're washing your hair and you can sort of hear the jingling of all their bracelets, the dolman sleeve is splashing in your face as they're trying to wash your hair. Their top is not supportive to the front of their body if they're a woman. These are all things that I think need to be considered when we know when we go into a class that we're going to be assisting our students. So I'll leave that to you, obviously, to decide. what that means to you. I just wanted to bring it up because it's oftentimes not something that's brought up. And I will say the pant leg thing isn't as much of an issue today, but back in the day, a very popular pant style was wide-legged Lululemon pants. And I can absolutely tell you from experience, there were a handful of times I almost tripped and fell on a student because my foot was caught in my pant leg. Not good. Now, just a couple of final things. From the student's point of view, just make sure you know when to back off. Now, this most likely comes up in a deepening assist, but just know like there may be a time that you assist and you get the sense that the person is just not having it. So again, you're just neutral. You're just going to move on. And you want to just be aware of their reaction. So if it is a posture where you're assisting them and you can see their face, just without looking straight at their face, just be aware if you're sort of glancing sideways at them. You want to obviously make note of anything that looks like they're uncomfortable or anything that might lead you to believe, you need to back off. Now, keep in mind, this whole interaction is probably about 3 seconds tops. So this is a really quick interaction. Um, and then, just in terms of the studio environment itself, make sure the studio is clean, make sure you've got appropriate spacing between mats, make sure you have extra towels available. And then the last thing I'll say is if you ever assist a student and the student has a reaction that's an emotional reaction, your job is just to stay neutral. Your job is not, in my view, to console them, to say, oh, I'm sorry, to say, anything that gets you into a place and space where now you're coaching or counseling that person. Your role is simply an agnostic one. You're kind of like a spiritual ninja, kind of moving from person to person. Obviously, if someone does begin to cry, if there are tissues available in your studio, just just put the tissue box nearby. You don't need to ask them, do they need a tissue? You don't need to break, obviously, that fourth wall by saying, would you like a tissue? You can always just get them tissues and just gently put them at the side of the mat. I want to just bring this up because many times as humans, we feel this need to console the other person. And it is not within our professional scope of practice to be a therapist for our students, to speak to them about personal situations they have. And I believe we need to be pretty, pretty boundary aware when it comes to things like that. This is a very rare instance, but I think it's an important topic to bring up. There are so many stories that people share about that time they were in half pigeon and they started to cry. There's a whole other conversation we can have about why that might happen. But in the context of what we're talking about here, if you do find that someone gets emotional while you're assisting them, of course, in your heart, you have, concern for this person. Of course, in your heart, your desire is there to help. It's just that it needs to come through the filter of professionalism. And so what that looks like in my mind is, of course, tissues at the ready if you have them, but just leave them be. Because again, you don't know what is going on. You have no context for their crying. They could be crying out of joy, not crying out of despair or sadness. We just don't know. We don't know anything about any of it, but certainly if someone's having an emotional reaction like crying, we have no idea what that could mean. So, and then after the class, resist the urge to run up to the person. Are you okay? Are you okay? Because again, you're not there to be their therapist. If that person approaches you and says, hey, thanks for the tissues, great, sure thing, you know, have a good night or something along those lines. Don't feel like that's an opportunity to now engage with the person. Oh, I saw you were upset, that sort of thing. So I hope that makes sense. I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's an important topic that doesn't often get discussed. So with that, we're going to come now to sort of the wrap up of this episode. I'll wrap up again, by basically saying there's different spaces and places, both mentally and technically, that you may be in when it comes to assisting. Now, a lot of times teachers say to me, I'd love to learn assisting from you, but I feel like I can't do it because we don't live in the same place and I can't go to any of your classes or trainings that you do in person because we don't live near each other. I will just say, obviously it's easier to teach somebody assisting techniques if you're in the same room with them. But if you are interested in learning how to assist your students, I can definitely do that via an online training. So if you are interested in that, just send me a DM on Instagram and I'll tell you how I do this sort of thing, in the context of doing it online versus in person. And then the final thing I'll say is, over the past several weeks, I've been taking the October 2025 group through the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program, and they're absolutely loving it. The feedback they're sharing with each other and me from week to week about the greater confidence they're feeling in their classes as a result of going through the program is just so cool to experience. Teachers are talking about having more confidence around sharing their cues, more confidence around building their sequences, more confidence around using a signature sequence. They're having these light bulb moments where they realize the why behind the cues they're sharing. They're learning about muscles and poses and how muscles work. So all of this is just giving me so much more excitement about the the program and its potential for yoga teachers all over the world. And to that end, I will say that the last couple of teachers that enrolled in my program, one enrolled and lives in Saudi Arabia, the other enrolled and lived in Dubai. So I'm just so thrilled that this program has international appeal. And at the same time, I'm dismayed because these teachers are telling me that their 200-hour trainings really, unfortunately, fell short when it came to teaching them anatomy. So, for instance, if you live here in the States and you didn't have a great experience in your 200-hour around learning anatomy for whatever reason, know that you're not alone. I hear from teachers all over the world with similar experiences. So it's not something that's just for teachers in a certain part of the world. Bottom line, if you're ready to learn anatomy so that you can feel more confident when you're cueing, when you're creating your sequences, and of course, when you're teaching, go to my website. I'll include the link in the show notes. You can get the link off of my Instagram for the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator. And because you're hearing about it and you're a listener of the show, you can send me a DM with the words podcast offer, and I'll give you $50 off. So with that, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to talk to you next week. Namaste. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.